recruits. Doesn't look like I have very much to work with. Well, I've learned you have to deal with the cards you're dealt. You have to do the best you can with what you've got. So we'll make it work. We'll make a way. By God's help. I should start by telling you my name. My name is Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. Jephunneh, my father, was a Kenizzite. He was not of Judah. He actually was a descendant of Esau and of the Edomites. The Edomites were a long-standing enemy of Israel, but my mother was Jewish, of the tribe of Judah, and so I was adopted and brought into the Israelite family. And I was privileged to be chosen as one to represent my tribe, the tribe of Judah. Moses had declared that because of the people's insistence to search out the land and explore that land of promise, the land of milk and honey that had been given to us by God in covenant to Abraham, that we should go in and examine exactly what had been given to us and see what the land holds. And so I was selected along with a representative from each of the 12 tribes. My friend and companion, Joshua, the son of Nun, was also one of those 12. Well, our objective was pretty simple. We're to go into the land and we're to examine from one end to the other to see if the land was good or bad, to see about the people, if they were strong or if they were weak, to see if the people were few or many. We were to see if the land had richness and productivity and fruitfulness, or to see if it was poor, to see if there were forests or if the land was barren. So we were to make an examination, and we were to bring evidence of what we had found back and report to the tribes of Israel at our camp at Kadesh. And so the 12 of us went forth. Now, we began the actual mission by going through the wilderness of Zin and going down to the southern part of what is now Israel. We made our way from Hamath to Hebron. Hebron is a very important city. It was a place that had much to do with the ancestry of us as Hebrews. You may know that the name Hebron means fellowship. It was a place where Abraham had met with God and covenanted with God. And God promised that that land of promise, that land of milk and honey, would be his and his descendants. And it would continue as covering as many as the stars of the sky above or the sand beneath, for generation after generation. The land of Hebron was where Abraham built that altar and entered into that covenant relationship with God. It was a place where other ancestors were buried. Abraham and Sarah were there, but also Isaac and his son Jacob and their wives. So it was a very strategic place that we examined and explored. But there was one problem. At Hebron, there were giants, fearsome people. There were those that were called the Anakim, and the 3 sons of Anak were princes who oversaw that whole area. Those princes were Ahiam, Shishima, and Talmai. Those 3 tyrants ruled that area. Now, the Anakim were descendants of the Nephilim. The Nephilim were called the fallen ones, and they were from the beginning of our history all the way back to the days of the great flood. And those massive descendants of great height and stature and power and fierceness ruled over that land. They've been called by many things by the surrounding nations that had to deal with them on a regular basis. The Moabites called them the Emim. The name meant the terror the horrible ones, because that's exactly what they were. Others called them the name that meant the shade, or the ghostly ones. The Rephaim is the name they used. And still others called them Zimrim. It's a strange name, but it means those that speak with gibberish, because no one could understand their language. They were 9 feet tall or taller in stature and in height. One of those, Anakim, was named Og, and his bed was discovered, and it was measured, and it was 6 feet wide and 12 feet long. These were ferocious warriors. And when the men saw the evidence of the Anakim there around Hebron and in that area that we were spying out, they were fearful. And they cried out, "Who can stand against the Anakim?" That was their cry. But we continued our exploration. We went from there to the valley of Escroll. It was called that because Escroll means cluster. And in that beautiful verdant green valley, there were many clusters of great, gorgeous, ripened grapes. They hung from the vines so heavy and so large and so full that when we took a cutting from the vines, it took 2 men to carry that cluster of grapes on a pole over their shoulders between the 2 of them. We were taking this sample back to the base camp at Kadesh, and this was evidence of the fruitfulness of this land. It was a land that flowed with milk and honey. I tried to take the mind off of those men that were fearful of the giants and the Anakim. So I came up with a marching song as we made our way up the mountain, and as we went into the valley of Escroll that was so productive and so rich, not only with grapes, but pomegranates and figs. And so I had them sing with me as we marched down the road. I want that mountain, I want that mountain that the Lord has given me. I want that mountain, where the grapes of Escroll grow and the milk and honey flow. I want that mountain, that the Lord has given me. And we sang that song with gusto, and they forgot. Until we continued our journey for 40 days and made our way back to the base camp. And it was time, with all the people assembled there around the tabernacle. Moses and Aaron stood before the people and asked for each of the 12 of us to give a report. First, these 10 men stood up, and here, kind of segregated by ourselves, were Joshua and myself. And they began to speak about what they had seen. And they started out saying, "Indeed, it is a land of milk and honey." And these are the evidences of that. And they showed the fruit. They showed what we had brought. And the people oohed and awed, and they were aghast that it was so productive and so rich and luxuriant. But then another man spoke up and said, "But the people there are strong." Another said, "The cities are fortified." Another said, "There are many cities with these fortified giants of the Anak." And when he said that, the people cried out with fear, and they shrank back, and some of the women even began to weep and cry aloud. They even went further and said, "And besides the Anak, there are other warring tribes. There are the Amalekites down in the south. And in the middle section, in the mountainous ranges, there are the Amorites, the Hittites, and the Jebusites. And then over on the sea, along the Mediterranean, there are the Canaanite tribes, and they also stretch along the Jordan Rift. The land is resplendent with enemy warriors that will stand against our people." And I and Joshua, we stood up and we cried out, "No! We must go up at once and possess this land. We must go now. We are able to take this land." And as we cried out, encouraging the people that it could be done because God had given us that land. The 10 spies that stood against us that gave the bad report, they rose up and they said, no, we cannot. We cannot take the land because the people are too strong. The land devours its inhabitants. The people are of giant stature. And those Anakim are so tall and so massive. We're like little tiny grasshoppers in their midst. And by comparison to them, and as they made their negative statement, the people began to shake and tremble with fear. All they could see was death and doom, and they cried out and they beat their breast and they threw dust in the air and they began to speak against Moses and Aaron. And they cried out and they said, oh, if only we'd stayed in Egypt in slavery and died there and rather than dying here in the wilderness. They said, perhaps we need to choose us a new leader who will take us back to Egypt. What blasphemy! What rejection of God and what God has graciously put before His people. And Moses and Aaron heard those words and they fell on their face and they began to cry out to God for His mercy. Joshua and I, we tore our robes. We were such stricken with grief and agony of soul. We couldn't believe what our people were saying. We tried to quiet them and tried again to encourage them. If the Lord delights in us, we can take this land. We can receive it from God's hand. Only do not rebel against God, we cried. Do not fear the people, for they are like bread to us. It'll be like eating a sack lunch. God's already removed His power from them and His protection. And God is with us. Do not fear to go. The people would have none of it. Their hearts were stone cold hard and filled with bitterness. And they even reached down and picked up stones and they were ready to hurl those stones at Joshua and myself and kill us dead for the very things we were saying. And as they took those stones and prepared to hurl them at us at the tabernacle, the Shekinah glory of God suddenly fell down on that place. And there were lightnings and thunderings, and the glorious burning light of God's presence was there. And the people did tremble in fear then, because they dealt with the real power that made any difference in their world and their lives. And God was filled with wrath against His people because of their rejection. God determined to wipe them all out. He told Moses that He would do away with that entire people and raise up a new people from Moses' seed, who would be a new generation. Moses cried out to God. Moses, our leader, is a man of great compassion and humility, and he bowed on his face and said, oh God, You're a God of pardon. You're a God of mercy and a God of long suffering. Please do not do such a thing. It will be reproach to your name among the enemies of God. Those pagans of Egypt will hear of this and they'll speak evil of your name. God drew back His hand of wrath, but He determined the judgment would be that not a one of them would see that land. They would all die in the wilderness as the wandering would continue for another 40 years. 40 years for the 40 days of traversing the land to see what God could have given them. They'd remember it every single year as they were in the burning sands of the wilderness until every single one of that generation was buried. I saw a lot of my fellow Israelites buried in the desert in the wilderness because none of that generation received the promise. And those 10 that stood in rebellion and brought the people to the place of mutiny, God sent a plague upon them and they were struck dead. But what it meant is that the remainder of us spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness until that generation had completely died off and their children had been raised up. At the end of those 40 years, we made our way back to Kadesh. And now it was time to cross over into the promised land and take possession of it. And this time they went forth boldly. Moses had passed on. He had died and passed the mantle of leadership to Joshua. And a capable leader he was to lead us into the conquest of that land. There were battles. There were some defeats, but there were victories. And we laid possession of that land in 5 years. It became ours as God had declared it would be. Now, at the end of that time, I stood before Joshua. And I reminded my dear brother of the promise that God had made to me. I reminded him of all of the things that had transpired 45 years before. I told him how the people's heart melted when the spies gave the 10 reports. I told him how God said with a promise that I, as the one who was faithfully representing God, a man of a different spirit God declared me to be. A man, God said, who wholly followed him. A promise was made that the land that I had seen with my eyes and that I had traversed with my foot would be mine and my descendants for all of my life and all of their life. And now I was reminding Joshua of that promise, as the Lord had declared that every place that the sole of my sandal touched, that land would be my possession and my inheritance. And I said, now Joshua, I am 85 years old. I was 40 when we first came to the threshold into the promised land, and the people rejected God. And now we've wandered another 40 years and 5 years in the conquest, and that whole 85 years. Here I stand before you, and I stand just as strong today as I was back then. Look, I can go in and I can go out. I have the same strength and stamina and power by the grace of God, and I'm ready to take possession of that land. And Joshua gave me the blessing and gave me Hebron as my inheritance and all the surrounding land. I had to go and lay possession of it. And I had to deal with the 3 chieftains of the Anakim. And they were brought to destruction. And Hebron became my possession by the glory of God and by his power and by his grace. There was still a nearby fortress that had to be dealt with in the city of Debir. And I made a decree among my men. Whoever will go up against Debir shall receive in my favor the hand of my beloved daughter, Asa. Well, the one who stood up and said, I'll go against Debir, and did, and victoriously conquered that stronghold city, was my own nephew, Othniel. And Othniel was wed to my daughter, Asa. It wasn't long that she took possession of Debir that had been given to her as her inheritance from her father. But she quickly realized that that region was in a desert place, and there were no springs to water the herds and the flocks and the crops that they would one day grow for themselves and their children and children's children. So she came and asked a favor of her father. She said, Father, I would like to have the adjacent springs that I might have water for my land. Well, when your daughter comes and she gets into your heart and she twists the strings, I had to say yes. And I gave her the springs on the higher and lower end of that plateau, that she might have that in addition to the city of Debir. And she and her husband lived graciously there. Now, I'm looking for those recruits. I'm looking for people who will stand up and be the men and women of God. I'm looking for people who will be bold and fearless. I'm looking for people who will have a different spirit. You see, there is a spirit that is of this age. There's a spirit that is of the world. There's a spirit that is of selfishness and pride and arrogance and even fear. But I'm looking for those of a different spirit, the wind of heaven blowing through their heart. And they're willing to take a stand and boldly represent God. I'm looking for people of faith who will stand with me and continue the conquest to lay claim to the kingdom of God until he comes and establishes himself as the Lord of glory once and for all. I'm looking for people that will wholly follow the Lord. That means 100% commitment and dedication to him. Yielding yourself, mind, body, and spirit. Surrendering all to the Lord. Now, I'm looking for people of character, because character does count. I'm looking for people that have optimistic faith. You see, God wants you to be expectant regarding who he is and what he can do and what he will do. Do you expect great things from God? Do you expect that he will do as he has said that he would do? Do you expect that when he has promised and laid truth before you that he will carry through on that faithfully? God wants you to take him at his word. He wants people not only that are expectant, but have a hope, a solid hope, built not in ephemeral things around them, but in him, in who he is, in his declared word. God is looking for people with confidence, a holy boldness about them that will stand up against the enemy, because our power is in God. And there is no enemy that can come against us. We stand in his name and in his power and authority. I'm looking for people that are optimistic, that have the foresight to believe that we can move forward and see those great things from God. Do you realize that a negative spirit is a spirit of the flesh? It's mistrust in the divine hand of God. I'm looking for people also of character who will acquire success. Don't go out planning to be defeated. Go out thinking that the victory is yours, and every victory is a monument to God's power, not to anything we're able to do. It may take time to see that success and to see those victories come to fruition. For me, it was 85 years. 85 years I waited for God to bring forth the promise of that mountain that he had promised would be mine. But he gave me the strength and the stamina and sustained me that I could receive it and enjoy it and pass it on to my children. God is faithful. He can't be outdone nor outgiven. And he's looking for people who will acquire and desire success in his name. He's looking for people that will be an influence and leave an impression not only today, but for succeeding generations. It was nothing of me and of myself that made any difference in my day and my time, but it was the hand of God upon me and my desire to fully surrender everything to him. You see, you've got to put all before him, all on the altar. And when you do, others will see. And they'll follow. And they'll lay claim to those same victories. They'll come to understand the truth of the God that you worship. As my daughter did, she asked boldly for a blessing. She asked that she might receive the best, and she received it. My son-in-law, Othniel, was willing to take a stand and boldly go against a powerful enemy. Not in history, but knowing that God would show favor to those who faithfully served. That influence made a difference in their lives and in others who followed that path. Now I just say to you, are you willing and ready to sign up today? God is looking for those kinds of men and women and boys and girls who will join the army of the Lord and claim the mountain of God. I pray that today you'll turn away from the emptiness of the world and lay claim to that is glorious and a reward that will never, never tarnish or come to an end. God bless you. May God keep you in His grace. May you ever have that spirit that is different because it expresses itself in a holy commitment